Insurance isn't one size fits all. That's why drivers have enjoyed Progressive's Name Your Price tool for years now. With the Name Your Price tool, you tell them what you want to pay, and they'll show you options that fit your budget. So whether you're picking out your first policy or just looking for something that works better for you and your family, they make it easy to see your options. Visit Progressive.com. Find a rate that works for you with the Name Your Price tool. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law.
Hello, and welcome to Around the Political World with John Rothman. I am your host, John Rothman. If you're a fan of the show, make sure to hit the follow button on the top right of Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you are listening at this very moment. When you hit follow, leave a review or share an episode with a friend. It helps other people discover the show, keeps us going. As I like to point out, each and every day it expands our base. It is Monday morning, and what a weekend. My goodness, how the world moved in the last few days. Let's begin with Iran. The fact that the talks failed, no real surprise there. Donald Trump has announced that within an hour, as I record this, there will be a blockade imposed on the Strait of Hormuz. This, my friends, is a fascinating development because remember, Donald Trump said he was going to open the strait, not close it. There are tremendous implications to this, and we will have to wait for the next hour and beyond to see whether or not what Donald Trump is proposing actually happens. Can those critical waterways be closed? And what will the implications be for the world? Not just the United States, but the world, given the fact that through the Strait of Hormuz, some 20% of the world's oil flows. You close, we close, Donald Trump closes the Strait of Hormuz. What are the implications for the world's economy? I point this out because we have a serious issue, and I will be watching all morning to see what happens. But there is more. Donald Trump has decided to attack the Pope. The Pope, turning the other cheek, said, I'm not going to get into a match with Donald Trump. But you must understand the implications. And we talked a little bit about this last week before this situation really escalated. The idea that the president would attack the Pope as being soft on crime is stunning. The fact that the Pope is turning around and saying to Donald Trump, I will not be intimidated by you, is fascinating. And I must tell you, if there is one thing I've learned, you never attack a pope. Nope, not a living pope. You might go back in history and have criticisms of Pius XII during the Holocaust or other issues, but attacking the pope, not to mention an American-born pope, not to mention, well, you could go on and on and on. So we are going to watch and see how this plays out. A president of the United States in a shouting match with the Pope. Not a good picture. And Donald Trump suffered a grave defeat in Hungary. That's right, in Hungary. Not only had Vice President J.D. Vance gone to Hungary to campaign for Prime Minister Orbán, but Donald Trump had actually appeared by recording or by phone at a rally. Trump and Vance committed to Orbán, believing that they could make a difference. In fact, Donald Trump said to the Hungarian people before they went to the polls, you want economic benefit? You vote for Orbán. And guess what? Guess what? It was a complete blowout. The opposition slaughtered, if you will, Orbán at the polls. This is not a good look for Donald Trump, who, I would remind you, does not like to lose. So this, my friends, another major defeat for Donald Trump. And there is a question now being raised about tariffs. Donald Trump wants to impose a new tariff, and the Supreme Court told him he couldn't. What will the outcome of this great battle be? It is fascinating, and I would define it with Donald Trump as the arrogance of power. I'm not even going to get into, but I will mention the fact that there are 4 golf courses in Washington, D.C. that are affordable for the public. And Donald Trump wants to take them over, consolidate them, I guess, do whatever he's going to do so that he can upgrade the golf courses in Washington, D.C. I wish he would focus on being president of the United States. Don't you? And we had another absolute moment in American politics when Eric Swalwell, the congressman from Northern California, who was one of the impeachment managers against Donald Trump in the first impeachment trial, has been accused by 4 staffers of sexual impropriety. And one staffer actually went so far as to accuse Swalwell of rape. Well, he has suspended his campaign for governor of California. And now the question is, will he resign his seat in the House of Representatives? And what will the fallout be? What are the implications going to be? Because Swalwell is not the only member of the House vulnerable in this regard. There are others who have been charged. The simple reality is that the House is going to change hands in November. And if there are more resignations and special elections, it could happen before November. I point this out because everyone is focused on Swalwell and the question of whether or not he did something wrong. But let me point out as well that Democrats and Republicans are counting the number of seats they control in the House of Representatives. Who is Speaker matters. And so let's be blunt, let's be clear, let's be precise. If the Republicans lose the majority in the House, if the Democrats are able to take over, the implications for Trump in terms of investigations and movement will be dramatic. Last night, I turned on Mark Levin, who does a television show Saturday night and Sunday night on Fox, and I watched him both nights, but particularly last night, where he went into a long discourse about the 25th Amendment and impeachment. And let me tell you, Mark Levin did not get it wrong. He just didn't get it completely right. And I want to comment on this very quickly with you so you understand. We've talked about impeachment, and I've pointed out the Constitution is clear. The House of Representatives can, by one vote, impeach a president. That is basically an indictment, which then requires the Senate to convene and have a trial. Is the president guilty? We have seen this happen in several administrations. But the simple truth is, no president has ever been removed by the impeachment clause. Had Richard Nixon not resigned from office on August 9th, 1974, the course of history might have been different because he most certainly would have been impeached by the House and convicted by the Senate. But Nixon decided to resign. So the other examples we have, from Andrew Johnson through Bill Clinton through Donald Trump, are examples of a system in which a president is generally not impeached and convicted by the Senate. But I want to deal with the 25th Amendment because Mark Levin made a very interesting observation last night about the 25th Amendment not being applicable, and yet many people are talking about the 25th Amendment. Let me remind you that the 25th Amendment was imposed in 1967 under the leadership of Birch Bayh and added as a constitutional amendment as a result of the votes being there to do it, both in Congress and in the states, in order to clarify what would happen in a vice presidential vacancy. That was the real intent. And let's be clear. We had a period of time when John F. Kennedy was assassinated, when the 2 potential successors, according to the Constitution, were in their 70s and 80s. Of course, John W. McCormick of Massachusetts, the venerable Speaker of the House, and Carl Hayden, who had represented Arizona either in the House or the Senate since Arizona was admitted to the Union in 1912. These 2 frail men sitting behind Lyndon Johnson caused grave concern. What if Johnson, who had had a heart attack in 1955, were to die in office or be incapacitated? This was the real question. And so you can read numerous accounts of the decision to impose the 25th Amendment, which has only been used twice in terms of replacing a vice president. Let's remind you, when Spiro Agnew resigned, Gerald Ford made the decision to proceed with a nomination. And that, of course, was Nelson. First, let's be clear. First, it was Gerald Ford who replaced Spiro Agnew, and then it was Nelson Rockefeller who replaced Gerald Ford. But the operative fourth part of the 25th Amendment, dealing with the removal of a president from office, was designed to ensure against presidential illness, a stroke, Alzheimer's, anything like that. And then, as you know, it requires the vice president, the cabinet, and ultimately Congress to pass the powers of the president to the vice president in a circumstance like that. We've never seen it, but could it happen? Had this been 1919 when Woodrow Wilson had his massive stroke? Yes, but the 25th Amendment wasn't operable then. And so Thomas Riley Marshall never became president. But here's the point. And by the way, Marshall was Wilson's vice president. But I want to express to you my deep concern about the appropriate use of the Constitution. If a president were disabled, and that really was the key, then the 25th Amendment, with the cooperation of the vice president, the president's cabinet, and the Congress, could assume the powers of the presidency. But we're not there yet, and we haven't seen the 25th Amendment applied in that fashion. What we do know is that Donald Trump faces innumerable questions about his conduct, the way he's handling his office, and in the end, well, the odds are, if you consider history, unless he does something so egregious that his cabinet and his vice president oppose him, he will survive to the end of his term, unless something else happens. But the talk of a 25th Amendment, Mark Levin is right, does not seem at this moment in time to be applicable. What is applicable would be if the Democrats take control of the House, if there were investigations, if there were a decision to vote by the House to impeach the president, and then it were go to the Senate. The odds of that happening extremely limited, unless a president does something so egregious, as was the case of Richard Nixon in 1974, once the smoking gun tape was released, that a president is relatively secure. And that leads me to Donald Trump. What happens in Iran in the next few hours with the question of blocking the Strait of Hormuz, what happens in the question of the Pope versus Trump, what happens in a series of decisions by a president will be of critical importance. If I were Donald Trump and I were the Republicans, I would be very worried about the upcoming November election. It appears to me that the Democrats are going to take the House, and they are going to make gains in the Senate. And if that happens, it's not that Donald Trump's power as president to issue executive orders would be limited. What it means, however, is that there could be investigations, real examination. So we're watching now, and the next few hours are going to be critical. If Donald Trump imposes a blockade, which is what he's talking about, of the Strait of Hormuz, and if 20% of the world's oil ceases to flow, and if Iran is held responsible, how will the world react? How will the United States react? And let me assure you of one other thing. Donald Trump now stands before the world and is being asked a simple question. What will you do? And let me assure you that Pope Leo and the president, in a head-to-head confrontation, it's not good for Donald Trump. So we have to watch now and see what happens. Now, I've tried to give you as clear an overview as I can on a variety of issues. And if you listen to my Voice of San Francisco and Beyond podcast, we will talk more about the implications of Swalwell and California politics in greater depth. But in any case, let me now move on to our conclusion. And I want to say thank you for tuning in to another episode of Around the Political World with John Rothman. I'd love to hear your thoughts on today's episode. You can write a review on Apple Podcast, drop a comment on YouTube or Spotify, and click any of the links in the show notes to connect with me on social media. Remember, please, to share this episode with a friend or colleague so we can continue to grow and expand. That, of course, is our goal. This show has been getting so much positive attention that we're excited to bring on advertising support. This will help us to create more opportunities for Around the Political World with John Rothman. My deep appreciation to Gogo Zoger, the wonderful producer of this program, who brings it all together and makes it happen. Gogo, thank you. And to all of you, well, we'll know soon what is going on in the world, particularly the world of Donald Trump. So I'll be back tomorrow, right here, Around the Political World with John Rothman. I can't wait. See you then.
If you like the show, please take a moment to rate, review, and subscribe. It really does help the show to grow. Thank you for listening.